the concept of Guru, one from Swami Aparanandaji and the other one from Swami Sumanasanandaji. And we are very grateful that both of them came here on this auspicious day to speak a few words on this very unique cultural and spiritual concept. Now, those of you who are familiar with the complete works of Swami Vivekananda must have read a very famous lecture, a very long lecture that Swamiji gave in the South during his Colombo to Almora lectures. The title of the lecture is The Sages of India. In that lecture you find Swamiji unfolds the mystery of India's spiritual and cultural lineage. Why India survived as a cultural, as a civilizational, as a spiritual entity. In a way, it is not limited to India. If you look at the history of ancient Greece, Rome, the great Israeli nation, you find they all survived because they were held together by a respect and reverence for a common lineage. When you hold to something that is permanent, that is stable, that's a cultural concept, then you also remain stable. One of the great major difference between India's civilizational lineage and that of the ancient Egypt, Babylon, Sumeria, Greece, Rome, even China to some extent, the difference is, if you go to this Bay Area today, if you see the temples there, the temple architecture that you find in the Bay Area here near San Francisco is a continuation of a temple architectural style that existed 4,000 years ago. If you go to Cambodia, the Angkor Wat, and observe the architectural style of the temple construction, you can find it's almost this Bay Area temple. Some of the temples are a continuation of the same architectural style. The music, the dance forms, the folk arts, different cultural and civilizational practices. They were preserved because there was an invisible lineage, an invisible connecting link known as Guru Parampara and Acharya Parampara in Indian tradition. Guru Parampara, both are more or less the same, with the one difference that a great Acharya is an epoch maker. He comes for the entire humanity. A Guru is, in some respects, is an individual concept, not necessarily. Coming back to Swamiji's lecture, The Sages of India, you find Swamiji traces the origin of India's cultural heritage all the way back to 4000 BC, 4th millennium BC, beginning of the Rigvedic, the Ayurvedic traditions. And then Swamiji traces through the lineage of Rama, Krishna, then Buddha, then Shankaracharya, then finally to 19th century spiritual phenomenon known as Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda phenomenon. So it was this invisible connecting link which is known as Guru Parampara, the spiritual and cultural lineage that actually responsible for the preservation and continuation of India's culture. There is one striking sentence in the works of the greatest historian of the last century, Arnold Toynbee, the great British historian. He is credited with elevating history to the level of philosophy, where he says, history has a message which goes beyond the list of events that history book contains. Is an inherent inner message, a message of inspiration. And that Toynbee says, the uniqueness of India's culture is that at every stage a great teacher appeared who took the best from the past, practiced in his or her life, reinterpreted and transmitted to the next generation. Swamiji says. Actually, Toynbee says, Toynbee was actually giving any quote. He was repeating what Vivekananda already said in the end of 19th century during his Colombo to Almora lectures. Now, what is this mechanism which is responsible for the preservation and continuation and keeping intact the antiquity and continuity and modernity of India's cultural heritage? It's again called Acharya Guru Parampara. Gu Shabda, of course, Guru Shabda, my previous speaker, Swami Sumanasana ji already explained. Gu Shabdastu Andhakarasya, Ru Shabdasta Nirodhakakam, Andhakara Nirodhitvad, Guruhu iti Abhidiyati. So, why the word Guru is used? It comes in the Prapanna Gita. He says, Gu stands for darkness. Rushab stands for the light that removes darkness. Now, there is a difference between education and education with wisdom. What's the difference between, let's say, you learn physics from a teacher. At the same time, as you learn, you have total content for him. He's getting his money from the state, and I'm paying my tuition fees. It's just a transaction. What happens, you may learn physics, but you may also use your knowledge for constructing an atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb, for the destruction of humanity. If you learn the same knowledge from a teacher who has some spiritual connection, then you not only learn what the teacher teaches you, but you also learn the wisdom that will help you to make use of what you learn for the good of humanity, and it also prevents you from making use of, from abusing the language, the learning. It prevents you from abusing your learning for the destruction of humanity. So, real education contains not only knowledge and information, it also includes wisdom and intuitive power. So a teacher not only teaches you what he has to teach you, but also instills in your mind a spiritual mechanism that helps you to make proper use of what you learn, and it also prevents you from abusing what you learn. That is the importance of Guru tradition. That's why a Guru instills a light in your heart, and the light helps you to make use of your knowledge for the good of humanity. This is the meaning of the Ru Shabda according to Prapanna Gita commentary. Now there is another word which I mentioned, Acharya. Acharya is a person who doesn't come for an individual. He comes to the entire humanity. Today we are discussing Vedanta today in San Francisco in the United States of America because Vivekananda brought this Vedanta to America in 19th century. Vivekananda brought this Vedanta to America because Shankaracharya built up the Vedanta Advaita philosophy in 8th century AD. And Shankaracharya could do that because Vyasa, who coordinated and classified Vedas in the 3rd millennium BC. So this is how the link, the connecting thread runs all the way back to ancient times. So what the Vedanta we are discussing today is not our copyright. Belongs to eternity. Belongs to eternity. I can give another striking example, which if you read today's newspaper, you can understand. Well, I don't normally talk politics. You look at the Israeli nation. I'm putting in front of you a living example. A nation or a people who were expelled from their own homeland 2000 years ago and was scattered on every part of the globe, and then were persecuted, not allowed to own land in entire Europe. We had to take to usury and other money lending parts. for their survival. And in 20th century, they came all the way back to their own motherland, from where they were expelled in 71 AD when the Masada collapsed before the 10th Legion of the Romans. Now, how this happened? Because they held fast to one eternal thread of continuation and lineage. In a way, that is also a Guru Parampara, an example of Guru Parampara. When you approach your tradition, your learning, your canonical literature with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, that gives you vibrance, vigor, and the ability to survive and continue to exist. There are many, many examples. The Indian history is another example. Chinese culture also, in a way, is an example. But you don't find that example in Babylon, in Abyssinia, or in Sumer, or Assyria, or even in Egypt. So these civilizations continue because they held fast and they clung fast to an ancient thread of a lineage of Guru and Acharya tradition. That's with regard to what the present times. Now I would like to give a few ideas from some of our ancient scriptures as to what Guru really means or should mean in our life. According to India's tradition, the greatest Guru is mother. It's a very interesting thing because when child is born, he doesn't or she doesn't learn from the mother, he imbibes from the mother. The language is the language of silence. So that's why Upadhyaya, Deshacharya, Acharya tu Shadampida, Sahasrenadhigam Pidhu, Gauravena Atirichyade. When it comes to mother, the respect and the reverence we should give to our mother, who is the Guru of all Gurus. That is our tradition. That is from Manusmriti. Upadhyaya is a class lecturer who comes to university, give one lecture, for some time goes away. And Acharya is, maybe roughly speaking, the head of a department. So the respect that should be given to the head of the department is 10 times the respect you should give to a guest lecturer. Upadhyaya desha acharya. Acharya tu shatampida. The respect that you should give to father, pida, is 100 times, Shadam, 100 times the respect you should give to the professor, the head of the department. Then, Sahasrena Adhigam Adhugu Gauravena Adhirichide. The respect that should go to mother is 1000 times the respect you should give to father. So, the highest concept of Guru in Hindu tradition is actually mother. That's why in the early days, in the ancient times, in the first instruction for the householder was Matru Devo Bhava. That's the first instruction after Vedic learning. Matru Devo Bhava, Pitu Devo Bhava, Acharya Devo Abhideva, Yani Anavadyani Karmani. Like that, it goes on, Anyway, it's a convocation address that you find in Taittiriya Upanishad, which I won't go further. Another very important definition is given to Guru and Acharya in our ancient tradition. One is Saguru Kriya Krutta Vedam Asmai Prayechadi Upanetu Tad Vedam Acharya Sa Udakrita. In ancient times, a Guru was always a part of family tradition. So when a child is initiated into Vedic studies through what you call Upanayana, Gayatri Mantra, that instructor is called the Guru, because a Guru is actually putting a light in your heart by instructing Gayatri Mantra. And then an Acharya is one who teaches the entire Vedas to the student. Now in modern times, one may ask this question, what's the use of this kind of personal connection between a teacher and a student? In modern times, of course, we cannot expect to go back to ancient times. Big universities, tens of thousands of people, thousands of teachers, different departments. It is unthinkable, it is unimaginable. But the point is, if we can retained in these modern times. The fact, some ideas, some ancient ideas, like, well, when you learn something from somebody, you should respect him. Apart from the money the professor receives from the university, he also deserves something more than the paycheck that he gets from the university. I'm paying my tuition fee, the university is giving him money, so it's just a trade. If you interpret education as a trade, as a commercial commodity, there is no culture, there is no spirituality, there is no value involved. But you can go even ancient Greece, but don't get away with the impression that this is a monopoly of India or the Asiatic traditions. In ancient Greece, how can you imagine a man like Socrates to emerge in a civilization without a guru parampara, without a guru tradition? Socrates is a grand example of an ideal guru of ancient Greece, ancient Athens. It's an interesting example. Marcus Aurelius, in his lectures, he talks about the need for including values in education. The greatest philosopher king of Roman tradition, Marcus Aurelius, in the 2nd century AD. So many of these ideas in different forms, in different formats, different manifestations existed in many of the non-Asian or many of the Occidental civilizations. So it's a fact that we should keep in mind. It's not just a part of ancient Vedic culture alone. It is actually, in one way, it always existed. That's why a great epoch maker is the teacher of the whole humanity. That way, it said, Achinodhi shastrani acharya sthapayatyavi swayam acharade chapi tasma acharya uchade. It is actually, it comes from the Smriti. So, the one who teaches a great value system, the whole humanity, but he also practices in his own life, and in a way, he brings from the past the best values and traditions of the past, reinterprets by making it ever modern, ever new, and transmits to the next generation, next century, so to speak. Look at Vedanta itself. Today we are discussing Vedanta. We are not speaking in Sanskrit. I had to learn this through Sanskrit medium as a small little boy. But today we are speaking English. Who is responsible for this? Swami Vivekananda. Today Vivekananda had not interpreted Vedanta in the language of modern science and technology, in the language of postmodernism, in the language which is intelligible, which appears to be rational, in a cultural landscape which was rejecting Abrahamic religions in the 19th century. Swamiji came to America in 1893. He was born in 1863. Just a few years after Karl Marx and Engels published Das Kapital, Communist Manifesto, Darwin had just published, before Swamiji's birth, had published The Origin of Species. So the creationist theories had collapsed. And modern humanists were rejecting religion as anti-humanistic. Even in the east coast of America, when Vivekananda came, these echoes could be still heard, though America was fortunate because it had this transcendentalist movement which actually pushed back the influence of Marxian humanism, which actually moving towards the west from Europe across the Atlantic. But Swamiji came and he interpreted this ancient Vedic lineage, ancient culture, in a language that we can all understand, in a language which any well-educated person anywhere in the world in today's conditions can understand and appreciate. So you can imagine Vyasa edited in 3rd millennium BC, Shankaracharya expounded, give it a philosophy and spiritual philosophy in 8th century. Vivekananda in 19th century, of course, as instructed and inspired by Sri Ramakrishna, because Vivekananda cannot exist, cannot stand without Sri Ramakrishna. So Swamiji as inspired by Sri Ramakrishna, he expounded this same ancient wisdom in modern English language, and today we are discussing it in 21st century in San Francisco. This is ancient lineage, going all the way back to 3rd millennium BC, and the other end is here on this platform. So what I mean to say, this is the greatness and strength and force of what we call tradition. So what I mean to say, today we are celebrating this Guru Purnima. Don't get away with the impression that this is some ancient Indian occult idea coming from some ancient books. Not at all. If we can practice in today's education institutions here in the United States, some aspects of the spiritual aspect of the spiritual element of education, that is, education not a transaction, it is a trade. You learn something from a teacher. I don't care for him so long as he teaches and I can pass my examination, which will help me a good job. If we can look beyond this limited range, and if we can bring in and enrich our education system with some of these ideas of sacredness, sanctity, and a spiritual element associated with education, it can certainly enrich the present educational system. Because without spirituality and humanism, education of any kind can only lead to catastrophe. Remember, Hitler's Germany was technologically the best educated country in the 1930s and 40s. They built up the best army in the world, the best air force in the world, the best administrative system in the world. Perfectionism was religion, but all the education, all the technological progress only led to catastrophe and destruction of millions of people. So a sense of spirituality, a sense of spiritual values, a sense of sanctity and sacredness to whatever we learn, especially in the area of science and technology and information technology in modern times. If we can bring in this sacredness and sanctity, which are the twin aspects that are associated with the Guru concept, sacredness and sanctity. What I learn is for the good of others, not for the destruction of others. And the one from whom I learn is to be respected and honored because he is doing a sacred job. There was a time when teacher's job used to be the most respected and respectable job. And in many ways, the best paid job. Now, if you look at California education system, it is perhaps the least paid job in California. So you can imagine. So the concept of teacher, it is a very, very ancient paid job. Now, if you look at California education system, it is perhaps the least paid job in California. So you can imagine. So the concept of teacher, it is a very, very ancient concept, but it can also be very, very modern, very relevant subject for our own times. So thank you so much. Now I have some